Today, we are going to have our faculty panel. This faculty panel is going to be moderated by Dr. Stella Sappho, who is the founder of Just Equity for Health. Woohoo! Let's just do it. Let's just do it, y'all. All right. Dr. Stella Sappho is a Harvard-trained, board-certified HIV primary care physician, an innovator in designing healthcare delivery models, and an advocate committed to gender and racial equity and civic engagement in healthcare. Dr. Sappho is an assistant professor of medicine at Mount Sinai, where she holds dual appointments in medicine and medical education. She's a founding member of Equity Now at Mount Sinai, Civic Health Alliance 2020, and the Coalition to Advance Anti-Racism in Medicine. In 2020, Dr. Sappho was named one of modern healthcare's top minority clinicians to watch. She is joined here by our lovely, amazing panel. We're going to start with Dr. Carmen Green, who is the Dean of the City University of New York School of Medicine at CCNY. Dr. Hetty Cunningham, who is at Columbia University and the Director of Equity Justice Fellowship and in Curricular Affairs, and also Associate Professor of Pediatrics. Dr. Joe Truglio, my boy. He is at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and he's the Director of Clinical Education for Center for Anti-Racism in Practice, Program Director of the Med-Peds Residency, woohoo! And also Associate Professor. Dr. Carla Boutin-Foster, who's at SUNY Downstate, Associate Dean of Diversity, Education, and Research, and Professor of Clinical Medicine. And finally, Dr. Gwendolyn Jacques at Weill Cornell Medical College, Assistant Professor of Clinical Medicine and the WCMC Space Curriculum Development. Welcome, faculty. Take it away, Stella.
So much. Good morning, everyone. We are so glad to be here to have this conversation. The conversation we're about to have really is one that's meant to go a layer deeper, and not just to talk about at the surface level the anti-racism work that this incredible panel is a part of and or leads, but to really talk about the specifics, what's hard about it, what isn't working, what needs kind of more fiddling with, and how can we all think about applying this in our own context. Give me one moment. So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I want to start off by talking a little bit about why this work is important and why it's important to specifically think about pursuing an anti-racism curricular agenda in our medical training today. And I think the medical student panel really did set that off for us. But I'd love to hear from your perspectives as fellowship directors, program directors, deans, et cetera, why this work is so important and why it's important particularly today. And we'll start.
Okay, thanks for that question, and it's a pleasure to be here. What I've been kind of really trying to focus on when I'm answering that question, in terms of talking to people nationally, locally, is that this work is crucial in terms of scientific excellence and excellence in care for all patients. So as the gentleman was speaking about from the Department of Health, our scientific endeavors have been grounded in a flawed system. And not only do we teach the flawed system here in America, but it's exported worldwide. These algorithms, these ways of looking at illness. And this comes up again and again. And, it makes me think, I was speaking recently to a precision medicine cancer researcher at our institution, and one of the students had pointed out the imprecision of the way that they were speaking about black and getting confused. You got black people, you got African American people, not really focusing, what is the precision here? What are you talking about? And so these flaws infect everything we do. So that's just one reason, and I'll stop there because there's so many, and so give my colleagues.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And for me, and I think for a lot of us, it's because of the mission, the academic mission, whether it's a four-part mission or a tripartite mission of research, education, patient care, and service, that without doing this through an anti-racism or health equity lens, that we're really not achieving our goal. We can't talk about excellence in academic medicine unless we talk about this. We can't talk about quality care without equity. And as my colleague said, the science that we're doing is so flawed. And NIH spends billions of dollars on addressing health disparities, and addressing racism can really make a tremendous impact on the amount of money that we spend on health disparities, and redirect that toward education and access to care. So it's, as a health science institution, it's imperative that we have these conversations if we're going to be true to our mission. Otherwise, we're not. And our students know that. Our students are calling us out and saying, y'all ain't right. So it's really, it's inherent to the mission that we all profess.
So just, again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for this invitation. I will say that we all take care of patients, and this downstream affects patients, right? So we talk about social determinants of health, and we talk about health disparities. When we don't talk about this in medical education, that leads to health disparities. So we can't tackle health disparities without tackling anti-racism in medical curriculum. The other thing is, when we talk about being underrepresented in medicine, unfortunately, many of us may know of trainees whose career was halted by racism in medicine. So when we talk about anti-racism medicine, it affects patients, but it also affects trainees. And when we affect trainees, that affects the workforce going forward. So it's really important that all of us have a vested interest in teaching health equity and social justice in medical education.
Thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me to be here. It's really inspiring to be around all these people. It really just fills me up to see so many colleagues and friends, and just, it's been amazing to listen to everyone, and especially the student panel. And this is a really hard question. I mean, this is like, it's almost a hard question to ask, because like, why are we even really having to answer that question? Like, why is this important? Like, how could this not be important? We do have to sit and think about it and talk about it, but one of the students earlier, I think they said they were a first-year student, said someone at their school told them, like, the longer they're in medicine, the further away they're going to get from their patients and their community. And to me, that was just so painful to hear, that like, that's how you're getting set up to start on like this profession, where it is about like your patients and your community. And just like, don't listen to that person, whoever that was. Like, just, that's not what should be happening. And like, when you sit in the room with your patients and you realize that as a profession, we are just failing everyone here, like, that's partly why it's so important. And then from within medical education specifically, because this isn't just like a clinical conference, it's focusing on medical education. I mean, I think we have such a responsibility as in this specific space, not just about inequities globally, but in this specific space about racism in this particular country, knowing the historic role that our profession played, medicine and science, in the creation of race as a concept to justify slavery and genocide. This is our history. This is what we walked into as a profession, and it's our time to sort of challenge that, reverse that. So as a person and as a physician, I think it's just the important thing we are here to do.
Well, thank you. And when I had a conversation with Dr. Morris, who's one of my heroes, she told me to talk a little bit about our school. And I'm going to start off with the fact that racism is in all levels, including how we make the decision as to who gets into medical school and who leads medical schools. And I'm actually very proud to actually do a shout out here to my colleague, Dr. Monica Lipsum, who I'm pleased to have said that I helped to mentor her. And to see her to go to such great heights and embed this work in her work every day. So, the pipeline, as we talk about the social determinants of health, where people work, live, play, and pray, there is absolutely no equity. There's no anti-racism without having equity in how we think about the educational process. And we cannot expect to have health and healthcare equity without having inclusive excellence, meaning bringing people to the table who've been left out. And so, our medical school I would arguably say we're probably the most important medical school, because if you look at the number of our students, we lead not just at the state level in regards to 4 times fold difference of people who are underrepresented in medicine compared to the rest of the New York schools. And number 4 as it relates to, and so what you're thinking about is underrepresented in medicine. You're thinking about those very clear little distinct groups, whether it be race, ethnicity, gender. But I'm also talking about over, at the graduation this year, at least 12 different languages were spoken by our graduates. And so how do we think about these things if, when you come into a room and your native language is Mandarin and no one speaks Mandarin? And then you make the comments that people have heard made, which is they've been in this country 50 years, they should learn how to speak the language. And so that's how it plays out. And so a person like that is supposed to come to us and share their deepest insecurities, ask questions about whether or not they can afford this medication, or is there an alternative to this particular procedure, until we actually think about how we have embed racism into our societal construct as well as into our educational systems. So the other point that I'd like to make, and this is really piggybacking on you, is that we know that healthcare disparities, and this isn't old data, actually costs us about $1.2 trillion. And 31% of these costs are due to excess costs as it relates to racial ethnic minorities. The data, this estimate was done prior to the pandemic. And so you think about that, and you think about how we've deconstructed, and let's just focus on Black physicians for the time being. Flexner did damage. So the policy arms, as you think about it, in 1910, for those who don't know, the Flexner report came out. There were 155 medical schools, about 7 of them were Black, right? And you end up with 2 medical schools that actually serve African American populations. So you think about Howard and Meharry. Those are the 2 that were left standing after that. And 10 years later, and actually that report talks about Black people. Black people should be going into hygiene and not into medicine. And so you end up with 2% of physicians being Black. Well, where is she? Where's my woman? There she. And now we have 5% of African American of physicians being Black, doubling in 100 years. And so that's how racism. And until we start thinking about this as really a structural problem, we're going to still, maybe in 100 years, 2130. I'm not certain I'll be there at that time. Well, maybe have 7.5%. In a world that is increasingly aging, increasingly diversifying. And I think we can do better.
I think we can absolutely do better. Thank you for that, Dr. Green. I feel like it brings us to a place where we have to think about our own stories in this. And one thing that I really enjoyed from the previous panel was people sharing what they've experienced personally. And so I want to ask, as you're comfortable, what has your experience been within your education to get to this point of structural racism within your curriculum, and how you've experienced it, and kind of how you now use that to frame the work that we must all do of addressing and dismantling that in current medical education. So I'm going to open it up as you feel comfortable. I won't go down the line again. But what has your experience been with this? Because I do think that there is we've gone far and we're still in some ways in the same place, and we'd just love to know a little bit about your personal experience with it.
Okay, we'll go down the line again. So I've been just tremendously blessed to be at the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons, where there has been quite a bit of recent support, at least for the work that we're doing. And so when my position was created as Director of Equity and Justice and Curricular Affairs 4 years ago, I had been working for many, many years doing this work unsupported. So that's, I guess, part of the journey. And then it's interesting to kind of, be having the students say, this work needs to be supported. And I'm like, I'm in this kind of rut of doing the work for free and in the spare time, and to have it be kind of moved as a result of student activism during the Black Lives Matter movement, moved a little bit more to the center, and then being so fortunate to work with Dr. Lipson and my colleagues here who are really now have been doing this work all along, but now we're really have more of a platform. In addition, I think when our student demands came out, the students really said, we need to be supporting the students who are working on this work. And similar to the Mount Sinai Icahn School of Medicine, we developed a fellowship. So now we have 5 students annually who are paid to do this work and to contribute to the curriculum. And it's been so transformative because I came up in the old system where we did not learn. I don't think I ever once saw a photo of a disease on skin of color. I don't think I ever once saw a patient who, example on skin of color was just not done. And so when I'm not able to see that, it's a blind spot for me. And in fact, when our students came and said, we need to talk about this issue of skin of color, I went back, this was 7 years ago, I went back and looked at my slide deck in pediatrics, all on white skin. That's how I learned. So I've thought about race every single day of my life practically, and yet I was still able to create this slide bank with all white skin. Those were the pictures that I learned on. So we can't see what we don't know. And so we have to have the students there, helping us. I learned about the pulse oximeter because it's not as big an issue in pediatrics. I learned that from my 21-year-old son sitting on the couch looking at Instagram. I said, Ma, these pulse oximeters don't pick up on drugs. I said, I don't think so. I would have learned that.
And just as we're going down the line, I'll share with you just even some of the questions that we ask or don't ask. Being at Harvard, it never really struck me to ask, how come the Black patients don't come to the Harvard system? They go to BMC. And years later, at Sinai, students ask the question of why do we have segregated care? Why do our Black patients need to wait 3 months to get an appointment because they have Medicaid when others, are able to access it sooner? And it brought me back to my Harvard days. Yeah, clapping for the students because they push the agenda every time. But it brought me back to my Harvard days where as you're trained, you don't even think to ask certain questions. And so that really, really resonates.
And the moral injury that does, right, when our students are coming to us, how come? I'm looking at one of my former fellows here, Cam Clark, who's been very outspoken about the segregated system, and what has it done to me to walk into that space every day for the last 30 years when my patients are here and I have to get on the phone and do all these gymnastics to get my patient in early, whereas if they have private insurance they're right in.
Well said.
Yeah.
And if I may add, it's been tremendously rewarding. It's really been a blessing. So I was born in Haiti, grew up in Brooklyn, went to SUNY Downstate, my medical school, and then had an opportunity to train at Cornell, where I met Dr. Celia Dick. Hello, Celia. And then I went back to Downstate, and it's been rewarding to live in the community, to go to church in the community, to know, the political affiliations, the CBOs in the community. So from that perspective, it was really great. But it's also exhausting and traumatic. So I remember during the pandemic, I used to walk to work when public transportation was not as reliable and very limited. So I would walk to work, and I would be on the phone with my colleagues, and they're talking about, I'm home and I'm sitting on the beach right now, and I'm at this property, and I'm walking down Flatbush Avenue, and I'm like, no, this doesn't look like a beach to me. And then, so it was exhausting because our students were asking and demanding things that made sense. And we were talking about racism but not necessarily going in on the conversation. So whenever we talked about it, I would get like super emotional and angry because, you know, George Floyd murder, Ahmaud Arbery, and my 20-year-old son is leaving the house to go jogging. So I'm giving this lecture, and I'm like, you know, be careful, you know, be very careful. So for faculty of color who are doing this, I don't think people know how traumatic it is. It really is. It's because it's living something, and as I think it was Antonia who said it. You know, hypertension, diabetes, and it's all pointing to people who look like us. So it is. I'm at a place where I have really wonderful colleagues. I have a great dean who's very supportive of the work that I do. But one thing that I can say that I wish we didn't have to do is rely on our students to do this work, because it's hard going to medical school. And our students need to pass step one, even though it's pass-fail, right? They need to get good scores on the on step two. They need to do research. And while this work is wonderful, it's very rewarding, but our students need to be medical students.
Yeah.
And every time, you know, I'm like, oh, we gotta get a student work group to do this. It's not that I don't admire or love the passion of our students or appreciate and respect the knowledge with which our students are coming in, but they're medical students. Right. You know, and I want them to do research. I want them to do like the other students are. So I forgot the question, but
no, just your personal experience.
That was my experience. That as rewarding and wonderful it is, it's exhausting at times.
And we don't have to go down the line. If you want to share it, that's totally fine. We have many questions. It's totally fine.
So I mean, I will say, so I am of Nigerian descent, and I grew up in Washington Heights in the Bronx, and being able to see different disease processes such as hypertension and diabetes and the preponderance of that. What I think perhaps even much more striking was this notion that you're predestined to have these conditions because of where you live. And so that was really the nidus for me, knowing that I had to get involved with this work. And then secondly, it was having colleagues or classmates who were told not to pursue medical education because their grades were not sufficient. And that is traumatic, right? These are people you start off with, and you don't graduate with the same exact end result, even though you have the same dreams. And I think from there on, it really taught me that it's important that when we have trainees, that we guide them and show them how, especially if they're encountering barriers, and give them resources as opposed to telling them this is not the pathway. So those two things are the things that really inspire me. And I will say the third thing, especially now as faculty, throughout all these experiences, I didn't really recognize how to synthesize it. How do we actually teach it in medical education? And it was through the work of Dr. Susanna Morales and Dr. Erica Phillips, who created a faculty development program. And it's called the Faculty Scholars in Health Equity. And through that program, really being able to understand learning theory and how do we incorporate different didactic models for teaching this in innovative ways. I think that was really critical because we see all of these things, we experience it, but we don't really know how to synthesize it and how do we actually teach it effectively. So being able to have those resources, and now I can say that I'm actually taking over the directorship of that program because it was so inspirational for me to be able to include that within my own training, that I think it's important that we focus especially on faculty development as well. So we incorporate the input from trainees, but we also have to focus on how are we actually training the trainers, right? If we don't focus on that, then I think we just can't really reach our maximum potential.
Thank you. So I experienced a very similar system, I think, as the folks who've spoken, but obviously as a white man, like my experience in that space was very different. And I think also I'm just looking around the room, there's not a lot of people here that look like me.
Yep, we were just talking about it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's usually not my experience in a room, but when we're in a room talking about racism, that's often my experience. And I think, there's been a lot of talk about students leading the way, and that was my experience. Like 10 years ago, I was co-directing the doctoring course at Sinai. Student came up to me after a lecture and they're like, hey, I know you're into like social justice. I know you like work in our community and you're really trying to help, but a lot of the things you teach are perpetuating racism. And I'm like, no, but having to sort of work through that and then evolve over time in a way that listens to but doesn't rely on the people bearing the burden of racism or oppression, be it students, be it our community, being my patients, to have that inform but not rely on that and place a burden on people. I think you were sort of speaking to this too, right? And I think my experience now within medical education is one where, now I've shifted a little bit into the GME space, being very engaged with the community, having a lot of community involvement in our program, down to like our patients interview our med students. They make our rank list with us. We have people who are not documented who come and like if you show up to our program and you list that you speak Spanish on your RS application, your interview will be someone who does not speak English, and they'll be talking to you in Spanish, and they live in our community, and they're going to be helping us make the rank list. And it's that authentic power sharing that like I think needs to start to happen. But then where I struggle is I find myself someone with very different experience from the people in my program. And they're experiencing what you all are describing, and I'm trying to sort of be a better support for them, someone who has not experienced that. So I think I've learned a lot over the years, but I still find myself struggling in that specific role. And finding that balance, I think, is really challenging. So it's been really great here today to sort of hear all these different voices and experiences and try to sort of learn from that.
Absolutely.
So, great question. I'm not going to try and say too much, but I think back to the day in which, as a medical student, there had never been a history of someone who was AOA at my medical school, who was black or brown. And my colleagues at the time kind of said, you're going to be the one. And then hearing an associate dean saying it wasn't designed for me. And then I said, what do you mean? And then making him really red and angry as he yelled at me. So it's kind of a PTSD moment for a lot of things that we experience. And then my journey as a faculty member and the research that we were doing that focused on disparities. And sometimes when you speak truth, people don't like it. And so, really we're at sort of this really important inflection point about the role of people, the ability of people to stand up, step forward to speak out. And I think our students are leading in this in many, many ways. And then I think there are just challenges as you become the dean. I left all the deans of New York to get here, who are finishing up another meeting. And I think it really setting examples of how am I inspired every day. Every single day I wake up. I was telling Monica, I said, Mother Teresa, I'm not a native New Yorker. Okay, so I don't know exactly where Flatbush is, but I remember passing it. I don't know the subways, and I'm actually a little bit proud that I don't. Because the one time I saw it, I said, that's bigger than a cat, and bigger than the squirrels in Ann Arbor. And so, am I correct? So, and coming from University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and I'm proud of many things about Michigan. We stood up in regards to the affirmative action case in 1996. But I get up to a why. Mother Teresa didn't come to Calcutta because she thought it was pretty, right? And health disparities and people dying before their time is certainly the most important, one of our most important issues of our time is that black women are dying. They're dying, whether they're chubby or not chubby. They're dying in labor, and their children are being born too soon or not being born, and there's something not right about that. And the outcry that we as deans, we as faculty members should have in regards to that issue. So my goal, why am I inspired, is that, we're taking people who, and making them doctors, guiding them through this process of being a doctor. And they're the people who inspire me every day. And I truly believe that, I think I was a very good doctor. I got the things on my wall to show it. But they're going to be better than us. And that's what inspires me.
That will be success, absolutely. I want to take us into talking about race-based clinical algorithms. As Dr. Cunningham mentioned, there are actual tools that continue to persist today that reinforce racist medical care. And so I'm interested in your institutions. What do you say to medical students who may be in institutions where there continue to be race-based clinical algorithms used, VBAC, PFTs, EGFR, that factor in race, and they want to be able to address how to remove that or do the advocacy to be able to address it? What do you say to them? And as you're answering that, if there's any successes that you want to share so that we can continue to learn from each other. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll start with Dr. Jack.
Yeah, so from our standpoint, there has been quite a push, especially in the different pathophysiology units. So for example, in nephrology, making sure that we are, teaching about race-conscious medicine as opposed to race-based medicine, and the EGFR is a prime example of that. So, and understanding the historical context of the EGFR and the clinical impact that it's had, especially in terms of placing people on the transplant list. So I will say that, through the leadership of Dr. Joy Howell, she's also guided in terms of being able to guide faculty who may not feel comfortable adjusting their lectures to be able to incorporate race-conscious medicine. And I think that that's been more successful this year.
That's excellent. What would you say to a student who says, this isn't happening in my school, how do I move this forward?
I think it's important that they also start those conversations, but it shouldn't be alone, right? The burden should not be on the shoulders of one student, and so being able to have discussions with other students as well, but also faculty, identifying, faculty who they're allies, and then having that conversation with that faculty member and bringing it over to the med ed leadership. I think that's important as well. I think we highlight the impact of students, but I think it's also important that we highlight that they are students, right? And that this work should not fall on them. But they are the voices of the generation and of the new generation, and they can lend those voices, but they shouldn't be the ones who are leading the work. It should really come to the leadership.
Excellent. Dr. Trulio?
Thanks. Yeah. I think to sort of start where you were finishing off, so that's exactly what to tell a student. I think it's come up a few times, we're not in it alone. You don't just reinvent the wheel. And I think, Stella, you and I do this all the time. So a student comes to one of us who needs something, you just say, okay, reach out to us. Let's talk to your faculty, right? There's content out there. We can help them. We can help them deliver slides. I think at a concrete level, for individual students, residents, faculty, thinking about what's in your actual sphere of influence. Is it changing the algorithm, or is it thinking about how you apply it to the person in front of you? There's been a lot of talk about the inappropriate use of race within clinical algorithms while not sacrificing the ability to identify racism happening in front of us.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes we overcomplicate things, right? For example, we know, if you sample lead levels, right, we know that's real, right? We know that certain populations in this country are going to have higher levels of lead in their blood. No one's going to pretend that has anything to do with how we classify their race. We're not going to ignore that. And I think a lot of people intuitively can tell the difference between observations of racism and just poor methodology and research design. And there are tools out there to help them figure that out, but I think starting with what's intuitive makes sense. And then the last thing on this particular topic as far as how to approach it, we have on our curriculum committee for our residency program, we have a lot of patient involvement, and we were very excited to show them some of our workshops around how to deal with ASCVD, how to navigate PFTs. And they thought it was interesting, but they said that's really nice, but I don't really care what you know about race. I really want you to be able to talk to me about racism. And it just totally shifted our curriculum design to moving a little bit away from, all right, how can I appraise this article? How can I break it down to how do I sit with a patient in front of me who says, this happened to me? Or I need my prostate screened because I'm black, or like I was told I could take this medicine or whatever it happens to be, and like that shift, I think that is definitely not happening in educational spaces when we learn how to talk to patients in courses like the one I ran. I know I never taught students how to have those conversations, and that was a big failure.
Yeah. And if I may add, I think one of the things, so we've been truly fortunate to partner with New York City Department of Health and Dr. Michelle Morse as being part of the Coalition to Eliminate Racism in Clinical Algorithms. And working with our chair, Dr. Maura Salafu, we were able to remove race from EGFR and are looking at other clinical algorithms. And I'd say to medical students, one of the things that schools do not like to hear, and we have a dean here, is that other schools are doing it. Mm-hmm. And if you look at elimination of race from clinical algorithms, there's a list of schools who have done it. Mm-hmm. And it's data. It's evidence-based. Like, oh, look, the University of so-and-so did this, and they're doing it well. There are a number of schools who have done this. There's also the societies. I think it's National Kidney Foundation came out with a paper. I don't remember if ATS, Thoracic Society, came out with one. They have. So there are a number of societies that have come out with statements. So data on the other schools that are doing it. And I know the reason to do something is not because someone else is doing it, but I'd say use that because that's data. That's what's called rigor of prior research in NIH study sections, that there is a premise for this. And the other thing is provide historical context. Mm-hmm. I mean, reading about the work of Samuel Cartwright and Thomas Jefferson and how they talked about the need to revitalize the black lung and pulmonary function, and the way to do so was through forced labor. I mean, that's data. So providing evidence of what's currently being done and the historical context why we can't continue to embed racism in clinical algorithms. I think that would be helpful in moving this forward.
I think, Dr. Boutine Foster, you bring up a point that the other speakers have also emphasized of not going it alone, especially in the reality that minoritized students are, at higher risk of facing the kinds of discrimination that could waylay their careers. And so when we think about those kind of first move forward, are you bringing in your faculty? Are you bringing in other students? Are you putting forward a signed letter? Are you sharing the information that comes from other schools as kind of a way to move and to move safely? And I want to open it up and think a little bit about the larger frame that many of you work in, which is implementing anti-racism within your curriculum. And it is the fad in some ways, or it was in 2020. People have already started moving away from it. But as we've all kind of established at the start of this conversation, it's the right work. It will continue. And as you're doing this, how do you avoid it being something that the institution kind of checks and says, well, we have that DEI committee, it's done, versus something that's actually implemented and done with strong evaluation measures and impact that you can really pick up on? And so how do you make this work real? Do you want to take it, Dr. Cunning?
Sure. I think one of the first and maybe most important tasks of our fellows was to go around and help me with curriculum mapping, and it was really useful because they were going through the curriculum, but also they, reached out to all the different course directors. Actually, before that, we took the AAMC competencies, even when they were in the draft form, really biting at the, chomping at the bit. And Dr. Lipson directed us, to distill that down into 10 competencies. So we had our 10 competencies. So we worked quite a long time to distill what we wanted. And then we went around to all the courses and we said, what of this are you doing, or what might you think about doing? So we started to build up, what they wanted to do, and not to put, prescribe, but really say, is there a piece of this that you could take? So that curriculum mapping was a really important first step. One of the, in concert with that, we have, so that's kind of the top down, like this is a mandate from the school. How are you gonna, fit into that? Now, we're going through a curricular revision, so we're taking those 10 things and we're making sure that they fit in. They may not be in the same form, but at least we know what we want to do, and we can, make sure that it's being put in each place. The other really important concept is the concept of the spiral curriculum. So I think in the past, before we had this curricular mapping, the idea was you have one, implicit bias session, you have one session on microaggressions, but really shifting to the idea that you need to introduce a concept, then students need to be able to, engage in that concept, practice that concept, and then finally, show mastery in that concept. So really taking this all these anti-racism concepts from just like, oh yeah, we did that, no, it's not just a grab bag that you can do it once. You have to build on those skills in the same way as cell biology. Everything has to build. The other piece is that we have a system of anonymous reporting, so students can give feedback for faculty teaching and anonymously, and then I'm the one who actually then goes to the course director and discusses that feedback. And what we came out with actually about a year ago, which was again a student idea, came out from our anti-racism task force, was having this feedback system. We also have, like many places, have a list of things that faculty should think about when they're creating their content, anti-racist concepts. But it's up to the faculty. Did they read it? Did they not read it? And now the students are giving all these feedback comments. So what we've initiated is a slide that is now, about a year, that has been going on 2 years. In every lecture, the faculty show a slide that says, I have read the anti-racism curriculum guidelines. I've read it, and I've tried my best. And but I invite your feedback. So it's very much linked with this,
I love that last part.
competency-based, the lifelong learner needs to be the educator as well, right? So now we're working with you. We're learning too. You can give me feedback directly through here's my email, or you can submit it to the portal. So those are some of the ways that we're trying to reinforce our curriculum.
Thank you, and I love the use, the way you've kind of incorporated fellows into this. Dr. Green?
Well, another great question. And I would say that from my perspective, this goes beyond reading the book How to Be an Anti-Racist, which was apparently a group read that people were doing before I got there. It's about action, and it's about behaviors. It's how you talk about students, how you think about students. And so I think there's some power in being a dean who is a dean of color, an African-American woman. I mean, I think the only other group of women deans that are more underrepresented are women who are Asian American, right? Deans. So there's some, I kind of view myself until Liz Wilson-Anstey from here as our associate dean. I've given her a very wide portfolio, right? And typically we would say she's the chief diversity officer. I actually think the dean should be the chief diversity officer because it really does come. You're shocked. I think the dean should be the chief diversity officer because in an increasingly diversifying society, if we don't get this right, so in 2011 is when we did the flip to our young people, more non-white children being born than white children. So 13 years later, I mean, this is what's coming. And so the dean needs to be knowledgeable about these things, maybe not the most knowledgeable. With that being said, we often, people talk about culturally competent. How culturally competent are we when we step into a room of people who use sign language? So we all can step in it. But I think, one of the things that we put in place was, first of all, people know this is an issue that's important to me. I start off, as some of you know, that we have undergrads. We have U1s, and so I give an undergraduate lecture on the genesis of some of these things within the first week that they're in their pre-matriculation program, and then on again. So I think those people who are faculty, staff, recognize that this is important to me. There's something to be said about getting those people on the bus because it's important to the dean. I've also requested that in every single course that there will be an objective that will focus on health equity. And so that our students can understand and the faculty start, so it's a bi-directional conversation. Now, we aren't where we need to be. I don't think anybody is, but at least we're sort of saying this is going to be important moving forward.
Yeah, and I want to reinforce that. I worked with a group that wanted to give out health equity badges to institutions. And, you know, one of the things that we came to is that you can't really give a badge because it's a process, right? That you're on this continuum where you have to kind of keep going, and none of us is there, but we're all definitely on this journey. I invite others to kind of think about answering that. Dr. Jack?
Yeah, so through the Department of Medicine Racial Justice Equity Task Force that was co-chaired by Dr. Susanna Morales and Dr. Erica Phillips, you know, one of the insights that we were able to glean from discussing with other stakeholders was that medical education exists in silos, right? So what is taught in the medical college may be different from what is taught in residency, what is taught in fellowship and beyond. And when it exists in silos, it really doesn't reinforce health equity, right, in the training. And so it's important for us to have collaboration across the different continuum of training. So that includes having course directors involved, having clerkship directors, fellowship directors, as well as internal medicine or the fellowship directors and residency directors as well. So one of the proposals was to incorporate a dashboard, a health equity in medical education dashboard that would allow for us to see what exactly is occurring at the different levels of training. It also allows for transparency, because I think part of the issue here is that when you have lack of transparency, it's hard to really know what's going on, and it's hard to know what the gaps are and how it's being addressed. And so having this dashboard, I think, will be really helpful to be able to curriculum map, but also identify what else needs to be done, because there's a lot that needs to be done. And then one of the other goals that we had is that by the end of 2025, that at least half of the course objectives would include health equity, and that is respective of the topic. So whether it's endocrinology or cardiology, pulmonology, that it should include at least a course objective on health equity.
Excellent. Dr. Boutin Foster, I'm curious from the perspective of, so we have these curricula, they're important. I know how our dean would probably wield, you know, the you have to do it, you know, like kind of stick. I'm curious though, from someone who sits in your position, what do you do for faculty that are a bit resistant? And I guess, you know, Dr. Cunningham also jump in as well, that are a bit resistant to this work. And in some ways, I feel like those individuals are getting kind of more permission now as we see states that are disinvesting in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and language like the woke mob and a desire to really be kind of pushing back against this. How do you bring faculty along who may be resistant to some of this work?
That's a great question. So one of the things that I often do is tie it to the mission and excellence, and I challenge faculty to think about the mission that they pledge to uphold, and are they really achieving excellence, and how can you talk about excellence when there are inequities exist, and to, again, bring data to them and how it can enhance their patient care. So it's really, you know, you want to be excellent. It's you know, we all want to be excellent and strive toward excellence. And it, you know, one of the things that's challenging is that when you start talking about these things, all of a sudden people get really tight, and you know, you're calling me a racist, and I'm like, no, I'm not yet. But so it's, you know, we're all in this together, and it's you know, that diplomacy that we always have to apply, and that's the other exhausting part of it, because you can't just walk in and say things if you want to walk out with a job. So it's really, how do I say something and speak in a way that will grab your attention? You know, look at the length of stay. What if we were to address the patient experience? So that's one of the things that we're doing with our colleagues at One Brooklyn Health, is to measure the patient experience by asking about explicit instances of racism. And we're developing this tool. We've developed this tool that we're going to implement. And to have patients say that and to feed data. This is what our patients are saying. This is what our students are saying.
Right.
And collecting data and feeding it back in that way and saying, we need to work together and move toward excellence.
Well said. I want to ask one more question and then open it to the larger community for a few questions. So we've all talked about the burden of this work, but the incredible importance of this. Many of you have done this work without the titles, without the payment, without the recognition, at sometimes harm to yourselves. I mean, it's harmful. You have by proxy trauma from some of the stories that you experience and what you experience yourself. And I'm just curious about how you protect your peace. How do you do this work in a way that allows you to continue to thrive and shine and be happy and have joy and be the incredible examples that I think you all are to many of us who are listening today? And I'll switch it up. I'll start with you, Dr. Green.
Well, pardon? Okay. Yeah, I think that there is trauma. And there is also the opportunity for great joy. And, I try to meditate. I believe in a power that's greater than myself. I think that I have some of the best friends in the whole wide world. They've been tested. If you knew why you were laughing at that statement, but they've been tested, have they not, Monica? Because you do need to know who your true friends are, right? And so, but I also believe in a world that can be better, right? If not us, then who, right? If not now, then when? And so, like I said, there are consequences when people fail to stand up, step forward, and speak out on some of these particular issues. But you do need to rejuvenate yourself. And so those would be the things I would say are, I wrote a paper a few years ago, and it was about disparities. And it was about hospital security calls. Yeah. And we were the first people to identify that. I'll just share that. First people to identify these hospital security errors. And I actually, quite frankly, was shocked, right, that black patients were being treated differentially compared to white patients. And not by a little bit. It was a 2.5 to 3-fold difference in African Americans having security called on them. And it wasn't based upon class. There were a lot of things. We're the first people to identify that. And clearly, that doesn't necessarily make you popular when you identify those types of things. I would say that, how do we protect other people? I mean, young people across the country, when they saw this paper, they said, I want to do the same study at my institution. And I've said to people, do you have tenure?
Have you graduated? Right.
I'm not that type of person. I'm not even talking about. I'm talking about faculty members, right? And so we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we have to protect our young people, and I think some of our speakers have spoken to that. I mean, some of this is work that we failed to do, and that may be because of the fact that we're trying to get something else done. I think we'll have to have a group thing. You and I, we were just on study section together. 3 days, just torture me. But I think, that's how we do it. And I just think that we just have to really take care of ourselves. There's a reason why blood pressures are high and people are dying before their time.
What was the question again?
The question was, how do you protect your peace in doing this work?
I think for me, it's here, right? So seeing faces and seeing people who are deeply vested in this work, having a community of people, having mentors, peer mentors, I think that is crucial as well. So having a family, your own personal family, but having a family of people who truly believe this work and the impact of doing this day in and day out, because it can be taxing, And so the relief, even though I'm speaking, the relief is actually just sitting back and looking at this room and seeing everyone here and knowing that what we're doing is important.
And I guess for me, it would be like prayer, every day waking up prayer and just being thankful that I have a job and I have a job that I love. And you know, that DMX, y'all about, what is it? I'm about to lose my mind up in here. And that, that prayer channeling DMX, but it's being with colleagues and here and then walking here and seeing, you know, Dr. Salia, seeing Dr. Lipson, seeing Dr. Green and friends from way back when we didn't even say racism. Right? We weren't, right? Sigum, did we ever say racism? Right? No, we didn't even say that. So it's for me, it's meditation, prayer, colleagues, we support each other, we laugh together, we cry together, and then seeing the next generation. So that you don't have to do the same things that we did, and you do it better.
Yes, I would agree. I would say fellowship is the main, in addition to meditation and exercise, but fellowship and you're just talking to the students, like having that group of fellows. They've indicated that that's been one of the most impactful aspects. Is being able to talk to like-minded folks. And then also sometimes, it's colleagues and it's students who are reminding you can't do it all right now. We have to have a long-term plan, and being able to say, okay, yes, okay. We have to stay sane in addition.
Well said. And I appreciate you, Joe, modeling what it looks like to give space. Even on this panel, I think I want to call that out because I think people say, well, how do I do this? That's what that looks like. And to answer that question from my perspective, oh, please, Dr. Green.
I'm just going to say, I
Absolutely.
don't need to be rude.
No,
but I've got
you got to go.
meeting,
No problem.
And my boss may be there.
Good luck with it. I would say in my kind of perspective on this work, it really is having that sense that this is a long journey and no one is helped. In fact, everyone is hurt. If you don't make it yourself in this journey, you matter. We are all going to do our part to address racism in this country, in this world. But at the end of the day, I want each of you to feel like you've had the life, the career that you wanted. And we have to kind of remind ourselves of that often, because I think you see the burden, you hear the stories, you experience things yourselves, and you think, this is the hill that I will die on, I will dedicate myself to this. Yet we need you here. And when I think about, recent suicides within our medical system, even here in New York, from individuals who are doing this work, the burden is heavy. And so I really hope that you hear us say the different ways that we're doing it. We need each of you here. We need you to do this at a pace and in a way that allows you to thrive. With that in mind, I want to invite any questions. I think we have time for one or two. And if you'd like to direct it specifically to an individual, it would allow us to be able to get more questions in. I'm going to go ahead to our colleague in the back with the beautiful blonde hair. There's someone all the way back there. I think so. It's kind of in and out.
Just very briefly, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for everything that you're doing, talking about. One, I wanted to just point out the role of families. And we talk about communities quite a bit, but we need to talk more about the role of families in healthcare. How they are often the anecdotal folks who know so much. My daughter can tell you right now, this is not how she normally is. I could tell you something. My mother was very ill, and it was a black doctor in the hallway. She hadn't engaged me in the room, but as we watched her walk down, get in her wheelchair, and I said, my mom got really sick in the middle of the night. Many doctors may have, nodded their head. She's still alive. Fine, but because she engaged me, looked in my eyes, and I felt like I was seen, I described her symptoms. And she said, your mom may have experienced a pulmonary embolism. My heart jumped because I never thought that we were at that point, did an x-ray or did whatever you guys do. She did have a pulmonary embolism. We play a major role in families, and doctors and the health community in general really needs to think about teaching, integrating, how it's a holistic family piece. And the second piece I just wanted to talk about was the trauma. that we can't continue to say, what do you do, what do I do, go do something. We have got to invest the same amount of resources, time, attention, money, and institutional care in addressing this long traumatized work that we've been doing. I'm at the age I have seen the Black Panther Party as a former lawyer, myself been burned out, and I admitted from doing death penalty work to watching and being proud of my daughter being a public defender, finally taking her year and hearing her say those words, burned out. And it's no longer something that we can just say, go take care of yourself. And it's no longer we can say, go to the EAP program. We're hesitant to go there. It's too close. There's not enough resources. But we have got to embed the importance because we're burning people out. We're losing them at some point in time. And then and the other point of it is that we're not thinking about their families, the bigger costs. That's just part of our work is to fight racism. We go home and we're shriveled and we don't bring as much. So it's heroic. But we have got to do more institutionally in every aspect of our work. Not to say, bro, take care of yourself. Hey, go out and do this. You know, you keep going. We need to put our money and our attention and our resources in understanding the impact of trauma and suicide. I'm really looking at it with healthcare providers and hospital providers. We can't do anything, white, black, green, if we are traumatized by what we see. I respect what you all do so very much. Take care of yourselves, but realize it's not going to be enough for us to pray, meditate, and I do all of those, and I respect that. But we need to have institutional systems that are involved in this work.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question, please.
Hi, thank you guys for speaking. I think one of the big things that really stuck out to me was that you guys have this fellowship program. I was told for the last 2 years that we did not have the resources at my institution to be able to give the students that are doing DEI work the opportunity to showcase that on their resume in an appropriate way. So what is your advice or your suggestion to those students that are doing DEI work but their institutions don't have the capacity to be able to give them the ability to showcase it properly?
Can anyone take that a little quickly for us?
I think reaching out to some of these organizations that were represented here today, because if there's not the critical mass or the support in your institution, there are these other organizations, and that can you can do projects with those folks throughout the country that will then reflect on your resume. There's also this new honor society, Equitas, and I can give you the name of that. But that they also have, it's an honor society that schools can get, and then it provides a network and a community of people doing this work. And when we speak about wellness, being able to work with people across the country on a project, that's really, rather than just doing it on your own, which is really tough.
Thank you. And that really, I think, reminds us to thank colleagues from the AAMC, the AMA, and other SGIM, other professional societies that are leading the way and giving us the tools and the places to showcase this work. I think that has been so tremendously helpful to our ability to continue to advance. I want to thank the members of the panel. Y'all have been amazing. And thank you all for your participation.